The world of Velaria was a cold jewel in the void. Its skies shimmered with tuomons, its lands wrapped in endless snow and jagged mountains of ice. Life was slow, patient, and full of traditions carved deep into stone. A very clan lived by the same rhythm. The woman carried the strength, the men carried the rare gift of life, and together they kept their people alive. Velarian males were fragile compared to their women. They were treasured not for war or labor, but for the sacred role they played. Once very long cicle, only once a year male cold givelife. A single chance precious and guarded like fear in the storm. Families waited anxiously for it, villages planned their futures around it, and the very killed-born was celebrated as a miracle. This balance had lasted for centuries. To question it was unthinkable, to break it was impossible, at last until the day humancame. His name was Daniel. He had arrived with the traders who crossed the starlanes, offering metals, cloth, and tolls in exchange for crystals mined from Velaria's itchy cliffs. Most humans never stayed long. They found the world too cold, too empty, too slow. But Daniel was different. His ship had broken, his crew had gone on without him, and so he remained a stranger on a world that did not want strangers. The first time Lyra saw him, she talked a locked wake. He was not tall like her people, nor did his skin glow faintly with inner light the way Velarians did. His hair was dark, his eyes small but alive, and his body carried nothing of sacred strength. To her clan he seemed less than ordinary, but there was something in his smile that unsettled her, a warmth, a spark, as if he carried submarines in his chest. The Velarians treated him politely but distantly. They gave him shelter at the edge of the village and watched from afar. They expected him to break under the cold, yet he did not. Every morning he rose early, could wade with clumsy but determined swings, and carried water from the frozen stream. He learned their words quickly, laughed at their jokes, and sang strange songs around the fire that made even the most serious of them pause. At first Lyra avoided him. She was the daughter of the Igmatron, and her life was set on rails of duty. She was expected to lead, to guard tradition, and to choose carefully when the time came for her single yearly union with a Velarian male. She could not waste her attention on a foreigner. But on evening she found herself watching him. He was kneeling in the snow, struggling to build a fire wheel at the window howled. His hands shook, his breath misted with a but still he worked with stubborn focus. Others would have given up, but he refused. At last the flame caught, tiny and fragile, and his face lit up with joy. Lyra felt something stir inside the air. She did not understand it then, but later she would know it was the first spark of curiosity. The days turned into weeks. She began to speak with him, at first only out of politeness. He would ask questions that no Velaria never thought to ask. We do your males only givelife once. We must the woman lead. We do you bury your dead beneath the snow instead of burning them. His questions made her think, and thinking made her uneasy. Still she found herself drawn to him. He listened when she spoke, he truly listened, with eyes that held her words like precious stones. No Velarian male had ever looked at her that way. To them she was a daughter of power, a future matron someone above them. To him she was simply Lyra. And then came the moment that changed everything. It was during the long night, when both Monseed and the world seemed swallowed in shadow. A storm had struck, fierce and merciless, burying the village in snow. Manifires died and fear crept into every home. Lyra ventured outside to check the shelters, and there she found Daniel again. He was struggling through the wind, his arms carrying two small children wrapped in furs. He had gone into the storm to save them when the root collapsed. She ran to him, heart pounding. Together they carried the children to safety. By the time they returned, his face was pale, his lips blue, but he still smiled. They resafe, he whispered before falling to his knees. Lyra knelt beside him, holding him close, her heart trembling with a feeling she could not name. For the first time she saw him not as a fragile outsider, but as something fierce. He was not strong like her people, but his strength came from somewhere deeper. After that night she could not keep away. She visited his small hut often, bringing food, asking questions, listening to his strange songs. Slowly laughter began to fill the spaces between them, and then on a day when she leaned too close, their lips met. The kiss was clumsy, awkward, nothing like the sacred rituals her people practiced once a year, yet it burned through her veins like fire. She pulled back, shaking, her chest heaving as if she had room for miles. To him it was simple, natural, a human thing. But to her it was dangerous, it was forbidden. And still she wanted more, Lyra had always lived by rules. From kildod she had been taught to walk carefully to speak with control to never let her air trace too fast. Velarian ways were slow, calm and careful. Even their love was yet to time bound by chickless. Desire came on year, and when it came, it was sacred and measured. But now she found herself restless. A very morning she talked of him Daniel, the woman. She would watch him from a distance as he worked, his breath steaming in the cold air, his movements full of energy. He was clumsy with their tools, so met him as even foolish, but he never gave up. Where Velarians moved slowly, conserving energy for the long winters he rushed with life, as though the very day was too short. It unsettled her, it fascinated her. At first she told herself it was only curiosity. It was different, so of course she wanted to learn. She asked him questions about his world, his people, his ways, and Daniel always answered with that as he smiled. He spoke of warm suns, of oceans that stretched farther than sight, of families filled with many children. One evening as the sky turned violet and the stars spilled across the horizon, Daniel sat with her near the fire. He told her about human love. In my world, he sighed, his voice gentle, we don't wait a wall year for a chance. We can choose a love whenever we feel it. We can all day choter, kiss choter every day if we want. Life is short, so we don't waste the time. Liras breath caught. She felt her heart beat faster, a rhythm familiar and frightening. She had never heard anyone speak of love as if it were not rare, not locked away, but so mating free. She whispered every day. Daniel nodded as many times as you want. Love isn't bound to a season, Lyra, it's bound to the heart. His words burned inside her long after he left. The days passed, but Piace did not return to her. She found herself restless at night, her body too warm beneath the furs. When she closed her eyes, she saw his smile, the way his hands moved, the sound of his laugh. She tried to push it away. She remembered her mother's warnings, are storms, they are wild without patience, they will break you. But no matter how hard she tried, she could not stop the fear growing in her chest. One evening she saw him struggling again with wood near the frozen stream. She went to help, telling herself it was only kindness. To get her, they lifted the heavy logs, their hands brushing again and again. Each touch sent a shiver through her, sharper than the cold air around them. When the work was done, she did not leave. Instead, she stood closer, too close, her breath mingling with his. Her hair ratchet so fast she took the mig the arit. Daniel looked at her, his eyes soft, waiting but not forching. It was she who leaned forward. The kiss was quick, almost a mistake. Her lips took this and she pulled back immediately, her face burning with shame and fear. But he smiled, not with mockery, not with arrogance, only with warmth, and took her hand lightly. You don't need to be afraid, he whispered. Something inside her broke. The rules, the patience, the careful chines of her people, they crumbled. She kissed him again, this time the pair trembling but unable to stop. It was wild, it was messy, it was nothing like the sacred oncial ritual she had been taught, and yet it was real. When at last they pulled apart, she was shaking, not from the cold but from something far stronger. She could hardly speak, but her eyes told him everything. From that night on she was changed. But change is dangerous. The others began to notice. Lyra's steps were quicker now, her eyes brighter. She visited Daniel so often, the whispers began to grow in the village. She spends too much time with the woman on a woman muttered. E as bewitket her anoterissed. The men looked at Daniel with narrowed eyes, their pride wounded, their honor stung. To them it was a thief, not of food or wealth, but of something far more important, the rhythm of their people. Even Lyra's mother, the matron, began to say. She pulled her daughter acid on a night, her voice sharp. Do not walk this path, killed, you are a fear but a storm, storms destroy, you will lose yourself. Lyra tried to argue, tried to explain the warmth she felt, the joy that no ritual had ever given her, but her mother would not listen. You are a Velarian, the matron sighed. Our ways are slow because they must be, without them we would not survive, do not shame us for a moment of passion. Lyra wanted to obey, she wanted to be the daughter her mother expected, but every time she talked of leaving Daniel, her heart ached so fiercely that it broke the hearts to her eyes. One night when the village slept, she went to him again. Daniel was sitting by his fire, humming of his strange human songs, when she entered and looked up and smiled softly, as if he had been waiting for her all along. She sat beside him silent for a long time, listening to the crackle of flames. Then at last, in a trembling voice, she spoke. My people say you are dangerous, that you will break me. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I don't want to break you, Lyra. I just want to love you as much as you let me. Her eyes filled with tears. No Velaryon had ever spoken such words to her. Love was supposed to be a duty, a chicle, a cold and careful thing. But her was this woman, offering it freely, endlessly, like water from a spring. And for the first time in her life, she wanted to drink until she drowned. She leaned into him, letting his arms wrap around her. For the first time she did not think of duty, of rules, or of her people's whispers. For the first time she simply let herself fail. And in that warmth, curiosity turned into fear. The first whispers were soft, carried like smoke in the cold air. At first Lyra ignored them, telling herself they were nothing. But smoke always means fear, and so on the fear spread. The village of Velaria was not blind. They saw Lyra walking beside Daniel, too close, her eyes too bright. They saw the way his smile lingered when she spoke, and the way her hands reacted furious without thought. Velarians were slow to change, but quick to fear, and nothing frightened them more than something that threatened the rhythm of their lives. She has given her heart to the woman, on a woman whispered at the well. Her womb will burn out, and her answered darkly. The matron's daughter has lost her way, muttered an old man, shaking his head. The Velaryon men were the harshest of all. To them, Daniel was no longer a guest, no longer just an outsider. He was a thief who had stolen what was theirs by Beatrix. One evening, when Daniel passed by carrying wood, two young Velaryon men stepped in his path. You do not belong here on his path, his glowing veins pulsing with anger. You poison earth, he said. Daniel stood still, breathing hard from the weight of the logs on his shoulders. His eyes met theirs, calm but unyielding. I don't want to hurt your people, I only want to live. The men sneered, 10 live far away from her. They shoved him hard enough to send the wood scattering in the snow. Daniel staggered, but he did not strike back. He only bent down, gathered the logs again, and walked away in silence. The men laughed bitterly behind him, but when Lyra heard what had happened, her heart twisted with rage. That night she went to Daniel's hut, her steps fast and furious. She found him sitting by the fire, rubbing his bruised shoulder. Why didn't you fight back? She demanded, her voice shaking. Daniel looked up at her, tired but steady, because if he fight them, he proved their fear rigged, and he won't give them more reason to hate me. Tears filled her eyes. She wanted him to fight, to stand tall against them, but at the same time his patience could be anger cold. He wasn't weak, he was choosing pace even when it cost him his pride. She sank to her knees beside him, resting her forehead against his chest. They don't understand you, she whispered. He held her close. They don't need to, only you do. His words lit something fierce inside her. For the first time she realized this wasn't just curiosity or desire. This was love, real, unstoppable love. But love had a price. As the weeks passed, the whispers grew louder. The woman frowned when she walked by. The men turned their faces away, their eyes burning with anger. Even children repeated the words of their parents, asking cruel questions she could not answer. At the center of it all was her mother, the matron. Strong, proud, and unyielding, she had ruled the clan for decades. To her, tradition was not just law, it was survival. One evening, the matron called her daughter into the council hall. The great stone chamber was lit with pale blue fire, shadows dancing on the walls. The elders sat in a circle, their faces stern. Lyra walked into their gates with her heart hammering. Daniel was not allowed inside. Her mother's voice rang out sharp as each. My daughter, the whispers of the village have reacted me. They say you have bound yourself to the woman, that you walk with him as if he is your chosen. The words cut like a blade. Lyra tried to speak, but her throat closed. She could only nod. Gasps rippled through the elders, some scolded, others looked afraid. The matron's eyes burned. Do you not understand what you risk, ur mengivelife oncha iar, teir sedis sacred rare, tis balantia skeptus alive, but tis human, spatte word like poison, is not bone to chicles, eis chaos, e will break yo, e will break alofus. Liras voice trembled, but she forced the words out, moteri love him. The whole fell silent, e veriel der froze. Te matron rose to er fete, robe trailing across testone fluor. Love, yo cal tis love, tis is we acne, tis is unger without control. Non lira whispered te are spilling down her face, tis is more tan control, with him I fail alive, more alive tani ever have, isn't life what we figged to keep. Er moters hand trembled on te staff she carried, for the first time lira saw not just anger, but fear in her moters eyes. You are blinded, te matron sighed coldly, and if you do not entice you will be cast out. You will lose your family, your clan, your place in the world. Chose lira, your blood or te stranger. The words ungeav in te air impossible to escape. That nigt lira returned to Daniel, heart breaking under the weight of choice, e saw te pain on her face before she spoke. They want me to leave you, she whispered. Daniel's jaw tightened, and will you? She shook her head fiercely, te are spilling down her cakes. I can't, I won't, even if it means losing everything else. Daniel pulled her into his arms, holding her as if a cold shelter from the world. His voice was low, rogue with emotion. Then we will face it together, whatever comes. Outside the window le drove the frozen peaks, carrying with it the voices of the village, whispers of betrayal, whispers of fear, whispers that would soon become action. But in the small hut, wrapped in the warmth of a choter, Lira and Daniel made a silent vow. They would not bow. They would not break. Even if the whole world turned against them, the air in Velaria was colder than usual that night, sharp and heavy as if the world itself held its breath. The moons were spilling silver light across the snow, and the wind whispered warnings through the empty streets. In the council hall, the fires were lit and the elders gathered, their faces carved with shadows. Lira stood at the center, her heart pounding so loudly she tugged the cold alle arit. Around her, the voices of her people rose and fell, sharp and accusing. She dishonors the balance. She throws away her bloodline. She lies with a storm. Daniel was not allowed inside. E stood outside the avistone doors, alone, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air. But even without seeing him, Lira felt his presence. The thought of him gave her courage. Her mother the matron stood tall at the front of the circle. Her glowing veins cast light on her stern face, her eyes cold as winter itself. She struck her staff against the stone floor, and silence fell. Lira daughter of Velaria killed of my blood, the matron sighed, her voice like a blade. You have been called before the council to answer for your choices. Do you deny the whispers? Do you deny your bond with the human? The hall was so quiet that Lira called her own breath. She wanted to lie. She wanted to protect Daniel from their hate, but the truth burned to bring inside her chest. No, she sighed, her voice trembling but clear. I do not deny it, I love him. Gasps filled the chamber. Some elders leaned forward with anger, others shrank back in fear. The words had never been spoken by a Velarian before, love for a woman. The matron's face hardened, her veins glowing bright her with fury. Love, she spat. You call this way Agnes love, is no gift, no miracle, is endless unger, ur mengive oncha year and in tat patientially sur survival, but is chaos. If you bind yourself to him, you break the balance that keeps us alive. Lira is filled with tears, but she stood tall. Moter ur lausare chains, they keep us waiting, always waiting as if life is a thing to be rationed. But with him I have felt more life than in all my years. How can that be wrong? One of the elders slammed his fist on the stone table. This is betrayal. If the matron's daughter abandons our ways, what will stop the others? So no our people will burn themselves out like dry wood in fire. Another elder voice trembling with age whispered, or perhaps they will grow, but his words were drowned in shouts. The matron raised her hand and silence fell again. Her gazze burned into Lira's fierce and sorrowful tonche. You are my daughter, she sighed, her voice lower now e heavy with pain. I raised you to lead to protect our people, and now you risk destroying them. You force me to do what no mother should. Lira stroat tigtened what do yo mean? Te matron staff struck te fluoragain e choing like tunder. Chose, your blood, your people, your place in te clan or te human. If you chose him, you are not out of Velaria, you will be cast out. Te words in te are like a deat sentence. Utside te doors, Daniel heard te muffled voices te rise anfall of anger. E stod in te cold fists clanked, knowing a cold donoting, is air tacked. E had sen councils before in human lands, but neverone like this. This was not a debate, it was a breaking. E wanted to run inside to defender, to take her away from their judgment. But e kneute moment e stepped through those doors, te decision wold besealed, so e waited, trembling with fear for te woman e loved. Inside liras kest rose anfeller breat sharp and ragged, she looked at her moter at te elders, at te people wo had shapeder in tire life. She talked of te snow, te long winters, te patient rituals she had on ce believed in. Then she talked of Daniel, his laug, his hands, te way had carried children through te storm, te way had held her when she wept, te way loved without waiting for permission without chance. Te are spilled freely no, voice shock but it carried through te chamber. Richose him. Te whole erupted, voices shouted, some furious, some in shock, some weeping. Te matrons face turned pale. Veins dimming as if te fear in her had been stolen. She whispered, almost too softly to ear, "Ten you are not out there of mine." The staff struck the floor on a final time, the sound rang like a broken bell. "It is done, from this day you are exile." The doors opened and Lyra stepped into the freezing night. Daniel rushed to her, his eyes arcing her face. "What happened?" he asked, voice ticked with fear. Her lips trembled, her whole body shaking. She tried to speak, but only on a word came. "Exile." Daniel's chest tightened. For a moment, he hated himself for being the cause for tearing her from her people. But then he felt her hand slip into his, gripping tightly, as if she would never let go. She looked up at him, her tears shining in the moonlight. He chose you. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, his throat burning with emotion. "Then you'll never be alone, not will him ere." Bein them the heavy doors closed, shutting out the warmth of the village, shutting out her past. Ahead of them stretched the frozen wilderness, dark and merciless. But together, hand in hand, they stepped forward. They had lost a home, a family, a story. But they had found something greater. Love strong enough to defy a world, the snow swallowed their footsteps as Lyra and Daniel walked, away from the only home she had ever known. Behind them, the great gates of the village closed with a hollow echo. I had stretched the wilderness endless with the plains, sharp mountains and forests of black ice. The night wind beat their skin like knives, but still they walked. At first, silence lay between them. Lyra's eyes were red from tears, her hair tucking with every step. She had lost her family, her people, her place in the world. A very word spoken in the council hall still echoed in her ears. "You are not out there of mine." Daniel squeezed her hand, firm and steady, as if to remind that dog she had lost on a home she still had him. When at last she spoke, her voice cracked like thin glass. "I have nothing left." Daniel stopped, turning to face her. His breath came with the clothes, but his eyes burned with warmth. "You have me, and I promise as long as I breathe, you will never be nothing." His words struck deep, melting some of the chains in the air. She leaned into him, letting his arms wrap around her, and for the first time that night she felt safe. The days that followed were cruel. They built a small shelter from fallen trees, covering it with thicket as Daniel treaded long ago. It was no great hole, no warm village out, but it kept out the worst of the wind. Food was hard there. Lyra had always eaten from the stories of her people, never worrying about the long winters. Now she learned to follow Daniel through the forests, to set snares for snow rabbits, to break the ice of frozen streams for fish. The cold tested them, hunger tested them, fear tested them most of all. At night, when the storms howled like wolves, Lyra would curl against Daniel, trembling. "What if we don't survive?" she whispered on, her voice small in the dark. Daniel pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. "Then we fight until we can't, but I promise you, Lyra, we will live together." Something in his tone made her believe him. He was not strong like Velarians, not glowing with sacred veins, but he had a fire inside him that refused to die. and tat fire later on. Slowly the wilderness stopped feeling like that and began to feel like leaf. Each day they worked together. Daniel chopped wood, his arms aching but never failing. Lira le arne to kindle fire with sparks of stone, fingers rau but determined. They cooked together laughed at mistakes and leane donone anoter in silence when words weren't enough. For Lira the greatest change was in their heart. She had always been taught patience white for the year, white for the season, white for the one chance, but with Daniel every day was full. Every look, every touch, every kiss was a gift. She no longer counted chicles, she counted moments. One evening the sky lit up with ribbons of green and violet, the aurora, dancing across the heavens. They sat together outside their small shelter, watching the lights ripple like living fire. "It's beautiful," Lira whispered. Daniel smiled, his arm wrapped around her, "Not as beautiful as you." She blushed, lowering her eyes, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned closer, her hand resting against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Do humans always speak like this?" she asked softly. "I chuckled only when we may eat." Her eyes met his ten, and in that moment she saw no exile, no loss, no loneline. She saw a future, un'uritten, uncertain, but tears. She kissed him under the aurora, and the sky itself seemed to burn brighter. But exile was not without pain. One morning Lira woke to nausea and weakness. Fear gripped her chest. She had heard the whispers of her people that a woman's fire would burn her out, that her body could not endure. She tried to hide it from Daniel, but he always noticed. "What's wrong?" he asked gently, taking her cake. Tears filled her eyes. What if they were rigged? What if he break? Daniel held her close, his voice firm but soft. "Then we break together, but Lira, look at me, love doesn't destroy, it creates. You are a stronger than I ever believed." His fight steadied her trembling heart, and in time her sickness faded, replaced by something else, something new. Her belly began to swell with life. At first fear consumed her, would killed survive, would she? But when she felt the first kick, a small flutter beneath her hand, all fear melted into wonder. She was not breaking, she was growing. The months that followed were hard. Lira's body ached, and Daniel worked twice as hard to keep them fed and warm. But never on she did complain. At night, he would sit busy there, his hand resting on her growing belly, whispering stories of the future. "Our killed will run in the snow," he sighed. "They will laugh louder than the storms, and they will never be alone because they will have us." Lira's eyes filled with tears every time. She had lost her clan, but here in the wilderness she was building something greater, a family not bound by old laws but by love. The first killed was born under the same aurora sky where they had kissed. Lira screamed through the night, her body burning with pain, and Daniel never left her side. He held her hand, whispered strength into her ear, and when at last the cries of new life filled the shelter, tears streamed down his face. A dog 13 fragile perfect, with Lira's bright eyes and Daniel's soft laugh. Lira cradled her against her chest, her tears falling onto the baby's skin. She had never felt so complete, so alive. The whispers of the clan were gone now far away, drowned by the sound of her kill's first breath. Daniel kissed her forehead, his voice breaking. "You did it, Lira, we did it." She smiled weakly through her tears. "We are not broken, we are whole." And in that moment, exile no longer felt like punishment. It felt like freedom. The killed slept between them, tiny breaths rising and falling like soft music. For Lira, every sound of her daughter's life felt like a miracle. She often lay awake through the night, watching the baby's small hands curl, her lips twitch as if dreaming. Each moment reminded her that exile had not destroyed her, it had given her something new. Daniel watched too, sommettime se sat in silence, simply smiling as he traced the shape of his daughter's face with his eyes. Other times, e ummed human lullabies, strange but gentle tunes that seemed to sow the bot moter and killed. Tis lit leone e whispered on a night, brushing the baby's hair, she's proof that love is stronger than rules. Lira's eyes softened, she's proof that we belong even if no clan climbs us. Days turned into seasons. The snow melted, revealing streams that sang and meadows that bloomed. Daniel built their shelter stronger, adding walls of stone and wood. Lira gatere derbs an learne te aling power of plants she had never tooked before. Togeter te carved out a small leaf in the wilderness. Te daug ter grew quickly. She lauged often, a bright sound that made storm seamless frightening. She had Daniel's warmth and Lira's fear. When she looked at them with her wide eyes, it felt like she carried both worlds in the air. Lira realized something then. Her people had feared the union of human and Velaryon, but in truth their killed was not weaker. She was stronger because she carried the strength of both. One evening, as the sun set in colors of gold and rose, Daniel and Lira sat outside watching their killed chase fireflies. Laughed and showed in the air like bells. Do you ever regret it? Lira asked quietly, tog fear made her hesitate. Daniel turned to her confused, regret what? Leaving the village, losing the protection of your kind, losing mine. Her voice trembled. If you had chosen differently, your life would be as here. A shook he said firmly, his hand finding hers. Lira, listen to me. A very hardship, a very figged, a very cold night it was worth it, because it gave me you, and there is no regret, only love. Her throat thickened with emotion. She leaned her head on his shoulder, whispering, then he will never regret it either. But the wilderness was not keen forever. One winter a sickness came with the frost. It struck Daniel first, weakness, fever, trembling. Lira's heart filled with terror as she held his hand, feeling the heat of his skin. She searched the forest for herbs, boiled roots into bitter tea, prayed to stars that no longer felt like daily stained. Her people would have cured him easily with their medicines, but she could not return, not after being cast out, not with her killed. At night she sat beside Daniel, pressing cold cloths to his forehead, whispering words of comfort. You will not leave me, you are a stranger than this. Sometimes he smiled weakly, whispering back, I'm not going anywhere, not when I have 2 hearts to live for. Her tears fell on his chest, but she never stopped believing him. And slowly, through weeks of pain and care, Daniel's strength returned. When he finally stood again, Lira embraced him so tightly and cold barely breate. He thought he would lose you, she cried. You can't lose me, he whispered, we're bound always. The years passed, more children came. Each time fear lived in Lira's heart, fear that her body would fail, fear that the stories of her people were true. But each time Daniel stood beside her, holding her through pain, whispering hope. And each time she lived, each time a new voice joined their family. Soon their small shelter rang with loud Tarantini footsteps. The wilderness was no longer a place of exile, it was a home filled with warmth. Lira often watched them play, her children chasing on another, their eyes glowing with mixed light. She would smile through the hours, realizing that she had built something greater than any clan. Her heart whispered, this is my family, my true clan. And Daniel, a very night, would hold her close and reminder, we made this together, you and me, against the world, and we won. Years later, when their children were older, fate brought change again. A group of Velaryons passed through the wilderness, trader seeking new lands. When they stumbled upon Daniel and Lira's home, they froze in shock. Their eyes within at the sight of children who glowed with mixed veins, lounging freely as they played. Whispers spread quickly, impossible forbidden yet alive. The traders returned to the village with stories. Soon word reached the council who had once cast Lira out. At first they scoffed. Them fear talk, them fear that what they had called unnatural was thriving. Curiosity grew and finally the elders came themselves. Lira stood at the edge of her home as the council arrived. Her heart pounded. Memories of reaction still burned deep her father's cold eyes, her mother's silence. Daniel stood beside her, steady as always, his hands strong in hers. Their children gathered around, watching with wide, nervous eyes. The elders approached their gaze falling on the children first. They did not say weakness. They saw energy and life. They saw what they had denied. One elder voice trembling whispered, they are strong. Lira's father held her nose, stared at her in silence. At last he spoke, his tone softer than she remembered. We thought you were broken, but it seems you have built something greater than us all. Tears filled Lira's eyes. All her life she had wanted their acceptance, but standing there with Daniel's hand in hers and her children's laughter ringing, she realized something powerful she no longer needed it. She lifted her chin, her voice steady. You cast me out, you told me you was nothing, but look at me now, look at what love has made. Her father says lowered shame feeling them, but she did not wait for his answer. She turned to her children, pulling them close and smiled at Daniel. We are enough, she sighed softly. Daniel kissed her forehead, whispering more than enough. The council left in silence. Some carried regret or their wonder, but none called any the truth they had been wrong. Lyra watched them fade into the distance. Then she turned back to her family. Her children ran to the meadow, lauter brigtas bells. Daniel slipped his arm around her, and she leaned against him, heartful. Once she had been an exile, once she had talked love would break her, but now, standing in the home she had built, surrounded by the life they had created, she knew the truth. Love had not destroyed her. Love had saved her. That night under the same aurora sky where their story began, Lyra whispered to Daniel, our story will be remembered, not because of what we lost, but because of what we created. Daniel kissed her softly smiling, and murmured. And in the wilderness, far from the old laws of clan and council, a new legacy was born. A legacy where human fear and velarian patience joined, not once a year, not in limits, but endlessly. To jeter they had proved it. Humanity was for her, humanity was forever.